6-0 doesn't even come close to telling the whole story. So we will do the best we can over the next hour with your help right here at the Voice of College Football. Oklahoma Sooners 6-0. What a game against Texas. What a bunch of storylines, starting with the quarterback position, of course, that we will discuss here. And we can only do this with our guy, Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Mark. I just wish there was something to talk about this week.
Yeah, that's why we need comments, questions. Maybe we'll talk about like all-time best Oklahoma left tackles or something we'll do today. We're trying to come up with something. No, we are going to be here fielding all your comments and questions. And although I think we can guess what some of them will be. All right. Before we get to, people always want to know what's next and what's upcoming, but that game was too great to not give it its just due here. And I know you certainly did after the ball game. So reminder to everyone, join Jason right here at the Voice of College Football OU after each Sooners game. TCU's coming up this Saturday as Jason takes your comments and questions and gives his take on Oklahoma's latest performance. And the latest performance was really bad and then a whole lot of great that made up for it, and Kennedy Brooks to the end zone with 3 seconds left. Wow, 55-48.
Yeah, no, I think one of the strangest and probably best Red River shootouts there's ever been. I know it's hard to say that after the fourth overtime affair a year ago, but you kind of got the feel that this game was much better played on both sides of the ball, maybe than that one. That one was last year. So I think, to your point, Oklahoma started the game about as bad as you possibly could have started the game. With the first play to Xavier Worthy, then the block punt, then you find yourself down 14-0 within a couple of minutes of the game. But yeah, no, the game turned. And this is one of those games, maybe more so than any game, momentum. It's hard to get that momentum back when you lose it. And then obviously Texas had it for a large majority of the first half, 14-0, and then they were up again 28-7. But yeah, Oklahoma, got that spark, and certainly we'll talk about that. But I think a couple of really good things outside of just the quarterback discussion in general. Oklahoma made a lot of good on the second half. They made a lot of good defensive adjustments, specifically on Bijan Robinson. I think he had a little bit over 100 yards in the first half, only had 130 some overall. So they played him much better. In the second half, open field tackling was a little bit better as well. And then to your point about Kennedy Brooks, 217 yards played. Just a kid that you got to be happy for. Whether or not you're a Oklahoma fan or not, opted out last year and has really kind of struggled early on in the season. And he played extremely well. Offensive line played much better at times. You got to say that they played better when you run the ball for over 300 yards. I know that Texas struggles against the run, very similar to how Arkansas was able to beat beat Texas as well. But still being able to go and do that, running at a clip that you haven't been able to do so at all this year is certainly something that you can take away as a huge positive. And I think, for me, watching this team, specifically kind of in the first half, you look at a team that, yes, was 5-0, but they're just finding ways to win against teams that they shouldn't just be finding ways to win against. And I think, you kind of felt like, at least from my perspective, this team was probably closer to maybe 2 to 3 losses versus being undefeated at the end of the year. And I think the way, kind of the way this team played in the second half gives you hope. I think it gives you the thought that, hey, maybe this is a team that can go undefeated. We've talked a lot, Mark, about playing complementary football, and they did in the second half for the first time all year. And when they did, they outscored Texas 35-10. So it shows the potential that this team has if they can put it all together consistently throughout the last half of this year.
Oklahoma made that amazing comeback from 28-7. I think that was the score at the end of the first quarter. my thought at that point was that, of course, if somebody was going to ask me who's going to win this game, the probability is so far in front for any team that's leading by 3 touchdowns after the first quarter that that's the reasonable choice because of the score. But also, if they were good enough to take that kind of lead, maybe they're good enough to just keep it up. At the same time, I never felt like the game was over. Just knowing the history of these two teams on the same field, knowing the offensive weapons on both sides and also some defensive deficiencies, I still thought, I'm not letting this game go. I got to ride this for a little bit longer because it's 3 possessions. No, it's not a good position to be in, but it's 3 possessions. The other thing, to your point, is that there's a difference being in a 48-48 game with a couple minutes left. That's a while back and forth, but you're emotionally and mentally kind of prepared to be in that position because that's the way the entire game's been, versus the momentum swing of either we were kind of down and out. Maybe I had a temptation to check out because I thought all was lost and it just wasn't our day. And wow, doesn't this feel amazing to be in the game and we are clicking, versus I was kind of checked out emotionally and mentally. And I don't mean like the players decided we're checking out, but human nature taking over that we got this, we are on top of it. And when you're losing that, and you've been losing it for a couple quarters and everything's going against you, and you see this other team and the score is just going boom, 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 that mentally and emotionally having that lack of confidence and that fear that we're blowing this. That I've never been in that position, but I can understand what an athlete would feel like on either side of that. But I think most of us can relate a little bit more to the fear of we're blowing this, and we can't do anything to change it. And it just seems like everything's going against us. And can you imagine we're going to blow a 21-point lead?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I said, Mark, one of the things about this game that I've been in the stadium for this game 5 or 6 times, less than a lot. The momentum swings in this game are astronomical compared to other games. And I think one of the big things that was really important for Oklahoma, there towards the end of the third and fourth, the ball was on the Oklahoma fans' side of the field. So they were a huge factor. So yeah, I think from that, I think one of the things that was prevalent early is that Oklahoma really just didn't have any momentum. They weren't able to get anything done offensively consistently in that game. And then, I mean, they didn't cover Xavier Worthy the entire game. So, I mean, and that was really kind of accentuated very much early on. And they didn't cover very well on the back end, and they would get a couple of things going, and then they would get a couple of turnovers on the offensive side of the ball. But yeah, when that momentum starts flipping one side or the other, in this game, it's really hard to get it back. I mean, a lot of people that I have talked to, media, and just people that were there, said this is the loudest that they'd ever seen an Oklahoma side of the stadium. They said you can make the argument that the 45,000 fans for Oklahoma fans made more noise than they do in typical home games. So I mean, I think part of it has to do with the rivalry, obviously. But yeah, at the same time, they did a lot of, like I said, one of the things that has been a really big issue, I think, for Oklahoma defensively over the last 10 years or so is that Mike Stoops did not do a good job of making a lot of halftime adjustments. Give Alex Grinch credit; he did. He has done that, through. So they still didn't cover great in the back end, but the pressure up front was a lot better. And so, yeah, no, you got to think that it gives this team confidence going into, the next 3 game stretch within a 4-week period is very opportunistic for this team, hosting TCU, going to Kansas, and then hosting Texas Tech. But But yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see how they play moving forward, and obviously who's going to be the leader of that team going forward.
You got to think that this performance in the second half is giving this team a jolt, a boost in practice this week. You would hope, you would think, and also the fan base. We kind of covered this in a sense on our Ohio State show a couple hours ago because there's a small number of teams that fit this category, but Oklahoma's right there. And what we're seeing play out fits it to a T this year, where you can become so elitist in your look at college football and your team that really you're not happy about anything. You're not satisfied. You're not content. And that doesn't mean that you can't raise concerns about beating West Virginia on a last second field goal and barely beating Tulane. Certainly, there's a difference between, okay, we aspire to win a national championship and this is not looking like a national championship team. Let's talk about it. Let's evaluate it versus just kind of always being dissatisfied because, oh, we're just winning. We're not winning by enough. And that a game like this, where going into the game, I would have still said and did that Oklahoma was the better team, but it just seemed like Texas had a lot of positive vibe surrounding the team and the program versus Oklahoma having negatives despite an undefeated record. The things were not where they should be. And maybe a game like this just re-energizes everybody.
Yeah, and I think that it has. And for whatever reason, early on this first half of the season, first 5 games of the season, just everything's not clicking. Both offensively and defensively, but I think more so on the offensive side of the ball, based on where they were, what Oklahoma was projected to do. So I think just from the fan base, there was a lot of, I think, cautious optimism, if I could say. Just I think a lot of people know what this team could be, but they just weren't able to put it together. Not something wasn't clicking, and I mean, we've been on here for 12 minutes, so I think we've delayed the inevitable long enough. In my years of watching um, Oklahoma football, I don't know that I've ever seen a fan base, and granted, you're always gonna get that to a certain extent with a backup quarterback. He's always has been and always will be the most popular guy on campus. Um, I don't know that I've ever seen more of a fan base and a team get energized and rally around, one kid more than they did with Caleb Williams in this game. You saw it on the 66-yard touchdown run when he came in there for I don't remember if it was 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1, but the short yardage play to begin the second quarter. And then when Spencer Rattler made a couple more mistakes, it was inevitable. I mean, obviously you could tell Lincoln Riley didn't want to have to make that change, and it's hard. You got to think about it from his perspective. He recruited Spencer since he was about 14, so he's got a long-standing invested relationship with him. Not that he doesn't with some of these other kids, but I think based on where he was at the beginning of the year and where he kind of got to himself. He was just making too many mistakes. The interception, he got close to another interception on the tip ball when Oklahoma was on closer to the Texas side of the field. You saw obviously that fumble was very almost a carbon copy of what happened last year. So I don't think Lincoln had a whole lot of choice at that point. He had to make some sort of a change, and you can tell the team rallied around him. They invested in him, and it seems like on the field. Obviously, I don't have any connections or anything like that inside the team, but you could tell that they fed off of his energy. They fed. Um, just and I think more than anything, there's a leadership quality, the it factor that Caleb Williams has and this is not necessarily a detriment to Spencer Rattler. It's just he just doesn't have it. It's just, he just doesn't have he has he Spencer or Caleb Williams is more in the mold of a Jalen Hurts and a Baker Mayfield in terms of being a fiery leader type of personality, and and he doesn't have that. So I think that's a big part. That was a big part of the excitement from both. I mean, and I know Lincoln obviously is not going to cater to the fan base because I mean, no one's going to win games like that. But it seems as though, and I don't know what these reasons are. It does seem as though that Caleb has won over the team, and I mean, I think that's interesting, just in itself for a true freshman versus a kid that was a preseason Heisman Trophy favorite and a preseason number one overall pick, or at least top 5 pick. And so I don't know. Obviously, don't know. I mean, we can kind of get into the specifics around that, but like I said, I think just the turnovers in itself were something that Lincoln obviously made the decision where he had to get a spark for Oklahoma. So and they got that. They were able to get that spark for the first time all year.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And Jason, of course, did a fine job. My first thought is let's understand the position and the position at this university, at this school, in this football program. So, what is expected of Spencer Rattler statistically and in terms of points on the scoreboard versus what would be expected of him in his position at Kansas State, Stanford, Purdue, wherever, almost everywhere else? There is a all-time legacy, and there's a very recent legacy of just prolific quarterback play that's just at the top of the sport.
Yeah.
So that's what's expected of him. So throwing twice as many touchdowns as picks and putting up, 25 points a game average, that's not good enough. I'm not saying that's what he's doing. I'm just saying, for an example, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
The quarterback play and statistics and points per game that he would put up elsewhere doesn't cut it there. So that's first and foremost is the standard of the position at Oklahoma. Number 2 would be, yes, and I stated very much in line with what you just stated when I was asked about it, caller after caller after caller after caller on Saturday, that I didn't necessarily know, and I watched almost every play of that game. I typically try to watch like 3 or 4 games at the same time, but of course that game was paramount at noon, that Caleb Williams obviously came in, provided a spark, all those things. But in terms of who is the better quarterback, the better player, throwing, running, I think they're different players, so that's obvious. But in terms of total production, not necessarily that Spencer Rattler, especially in previous games and recent previous games, was playing that poorly at all.
Right.
There's a component of who's the better player, and it's at the quarterback position, which is different than just selecting who should be our tight end. Who's the best tight end? Well, okay, he's the best tight end, especially for what we do. He's not necessarily directly impacting the other players on the offense. You make that call within a vacuum. Whereas the quarterback position, there was an obvious, and I usually don't speculate on this or try to read into things, but a fairly obvious response by the rest of the team to Caleb Williams versus Spencer Rattler. That, again, at that position, it's unique in the sport, quarterback. You're also looking at, okay, who's got the respect of his teammates, who's being inspired because of their play and their leadership, who has the leadership qualities, who is making a greater impact to play this position rather than just evaluating who can throw a football better, who can run better. So there's that element to it, and it seems as though Caleb Williams has that. And one other note before I let you go back into this, Jason, would be, and that's sometimes unique to that person versus that person, that player versus that player, but sometimes it also involves that situation. And I think we see that more so because of the length of the career in the NFL, where a particular quarterback who had certain knocks and criticisms against him in a certain situation, then went to some other situation, and that was the right fit. The right coaches, his teammates responded differently, and suddenly they had a revival, a rebirth of their career, just in a different situation.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, Mark, there's tons to unpack about this. I mean, one of the stats that I saw out of the game Saturday, and for Oklahoma's struggles, they almost had 700 yards of total offense in that game. But I think one thing that was very paramount, Rattler was on the field for 31 snaps, 151 total yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, or 2 turnovers. Caleb Williams was on the field for 50 snaps, 511 total yards, 5 touchdowns, no turnovers. So, I mean, that's one way to look at it. I mean, I think there's so many different intangibles that you have to look at with this situation. You know, one of them is, you know, for whatever reason, I know there's some rumors about Spencer not being as dedicated to the on the field team as maybe his teammates and students that are fans that would like to see. So I don't know if that's it or just kind of some of the turnovers that he's made. And to your point, Mark, he played well last week against Kansas State. I think he was 22 out of 25, 260 some yards. He did throw the 1 interception, but he was, you know, incredibly accurate. But he just in this game, you know, I think it was like 8 out of 15, so barely over 500. And then he had those 2 turnovers with the 1 rushing touchdown. So I think the one thing that you have to think about, and there was a comment here that if you don't start Caleb, you very much run the risk of losing the locker room. So I think and that's something that Lincoln absolutely has to take into consideration when he goes about this. So that's certainly one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, quite frankly, and I think he would probably say Rattler didn't handle it well. And I know it's hard to handle, you know, something like that. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, you're in a situation where you're being fired on national TV and everybody's looking at you and watching you get fired and watching how you're going to react to that. So, you know, he didn't react as well as I think a lot of people would have hoped that he would. I think in some of in what I mean by that, Mark, in some of the situations after the 66-yard touchdown run, you know, a lot of people when he got to the sideline came and congratulated him. Spencer wasn't one of them. There was some stuff about after the game was over, Spencer kind of going into the locker room by himself. I think that was more the Oklahoma administration, you know, just kind of getting him away from that situation, knowing how he's probably. I mean, it's kind of interesting. He's more disliked than I can think of any player in the recent in recent past in terms of being booed and in terms of like chanting for the backup quarterback almost, you know, every game since West Virginia. Even in this game, we heard it in the stands. So, you know, I think Lincoln doesn't really have a whole lot of choice. I mean, I think you have to. I mean, obviously, you know, you don't, like I said, you don't cater to the fans, but you thought you heard some booing in that West Virginia game. I think if a Rattler trots out there first, you know, I think the fans will be in an uproar. So I think, and I think there's one way to look at, you know, if you have a guy that's very popular and maybe has won the locker room, but he's clearly not as good as the other guy. I mean, maybe that's a different situation. Maybe that's a different scenario that you're getting in. But you know, Caleb was equal as good, and I think there's a little bit to be said for maybe Texas wasn't prepared for him. TCU will be a little bit more prepared. So I think that's part of the consideration. And I think lastly, I think Caleb is a guy that is probably best suited to lead this team based on some of the lack of productivity that Oklahoma has on the offensive line. So I think his scrambling ability, his ability to run the football, you know, with zone reads or predetermined run, draw plays, stuff like that, gives Oklahoma a little bit of a better chance to extend some of those plays as you saw, two of the biggest plays, those long the long touchdown pass to Marvin Mims, and then the long reception to Marvin Mims um, was Caleb Williams just really just getting out of the pocket and then just trying to make a play. I think one of the other things that you've seen uh, out of Rattler this year is really just his inability to kind of take chances down the field, where you saw Caleb Williams do that. So I think all of those things combined, to me, would be. And it's a tough, like I said, it's a tough decision from his perspective, from a coaching, from a human element. I think more than anything, knowing what you do to this kid. But I think at the same time, you look at it and you take a lot away from the situation that Alabama had with Jalen and Tua. And I think Nick Saban handled that really really well. But at the same time, you've got to have a kid that has the maturity level of a Jalen Hurts to be able to accept that and do exactly what he did. Because I mean, no matter where Oklahoma goes from here, there's probably going to be a situation, whether it be just a 2 point conversion like happened on Saturday, or an injury, or he's still a true freshman, so he's going to make some mistakes. A situation where Rattler might be needed. So, and he's going to have to be ready. So, I don't know if he's there yet. There was some, and a little kind of a lot of this is internet. There's been about I've double digit rumors about Rattler since this happened on Saturday. But one of the kind of rumors that was a little bit prevalent on Monday, and then a little bit more yesterday, was that Rattler didn't show up to practice on Monday. And Mondays typically for Oklahoma is a kind of a recovery day and a film day. And so Lincoln Riley actually talked about that and said Rattler was not at practice, was not with the team on Monday. He gave him a day off to kind of rest and relax and kind of get refreshed. So again, you don't know behind the scenes if he was that, because I think Rattler even said he was a little bit sick, just wasn't feeling well. So you look at that and say, does it have anything to do with his mentality right now, or was he truly sick? Did he need another day? So it's just going to be very interesting, and it's something that Lincoln's never had to deal with at Oklahoma. They've never had and I hate to use the word quarterback controversy, but they've never had a quarterback open competition in the middle of the year. So I think he'll probably, if he hasn't called Saban yet, I wouldn't be surprised if he called him just to get some perspective on how he handled that and how the best way would be to handle that situation.
So I try to refrain from reading into hearts and minds. I do my best, but a lot of what we do here and are asked to do, whether it's trying to determine what coach would take what position at what school, or a situation like this, again. So I noticed as well, there was a very tight shot on Spencer Rattler on the sideline after the Caleb Williams touchdown. The one of many, the one of what, 5? But the one in which he ran for 66 yards, which was an incredible run, and just erupted the place. And there was a tight shot on Spencer Rattler, and he was just stone-faced. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm of the belief that we are, by human nature, selfish. Now, what we do with that is different from person to person. So we're going to internalize everything. We're going to think about ourselves. What does this mean for me? What am I hurt by? What am I affected by? How does this affect me? And that's perfectly normal, especially at that age, is perfectly normal to think, woe is me. I'm the victim in this situation. This is hurting me, and this is not good for me. But what do you do with those internal feelings? Do you say, okay, I'm going to be a good teammate. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to celebrate with my team. That's the response to make in that situation. And yeah, I didn't want to blow it out of proportion because I didn't see it carry all the way through, but it appeared in that particular moment, okay, he's not responding in a way that you would expect a good teammate to respond, to be happy for the team, to be happy for your teammate, to celebrate. You're still a member of the team. There are players that are in that position every moment of every game where they don't participate on the field, but they're still have the uniform on. They're still at every practice. They're still technically as much a part of that team as everybody else is, and on the roster, and they take part and they celebrate. They feel good about what they're accomplishing as a team, and we didn't necessarily see that.
Yeah, and like I said, it's for us on the outside looking, it's something that you would like to see, but at the same time, you have to understand the kid's perspective. He had um, he had everything in front of him, and then all of a sudden he thinks maybe, I mean, that's probably his thought process that now I have to start all over. That's
Hmm.
the situation, and I mean, and that's kind of the nature of the game, right? I mean, like I said, there's similar. You can take a lot from the Jalen Hurts and Tua situation as well. Jalen had to do, I mean, essentially the same thing, starting quarterback for the best program in the country, specifically at that time, and he gets replaced at second half in the second half of the national championship game, and he never gets his start back again. However, at the same time, he stayed engaged, he improved, and where he really needed to improve, even there in Alabama. And then when he was counted on in the SEC championship game, he came in and he delivered. So I think that's the process. And again, there's a lot of assumptions. I think everybody immediately says, "Okay, Spencer Rattler's going to transfer now." Well, I mean, I think conventional wisdom, I think in the back of our mind, just kind of how college football works right now, the societal impact with college football, um, makes you think that you got a top guy. Okay, he's the next best thing. Eventually, I'm going to transfer. Obviously, it looks absolutely horrendous for him if he was to transfer mid-season. So I think even if he's decided that's what he wants to do, now he's got to wait till at least until the after the season's over, or it's just, I think, just a bad look for him just in general. In terms of, hey, I don't want to compete. So, and I fully expect that he would stay till the end of the year. So, but yeah, I mean, I think there's no denying the spark that Caleb Williams brought to this team, and who's to say that just kind of going back and forth, seeing some of the comments here, but who's to say that Rattler would not have been able to bring them back? But he just was not playing well at all in that game. Like I said, barely completing over 50% of his passes, had a couple turnovers, almost had a third, and then undeniable that, and I'm not saying the offensive line blocked better when he was in the game versus when Rattler was in the game, but the stats kind of speak for themselves. So I don't necessarily think it's that. I think it's probably more of the element of the run, which probably changed things a little bit from an offensive line perspective and overall. And yeah, the crowd had um, a big factor in this game. Obviously, in the second half, defense was a big factor in just how well they played, how much pressure they put on. But he was still able to make those plays. I think he had over almost 300 yards of total offense for Caleb, and just almost a little bit more than half. So the one thing I'm not a fan of, and Lincoln kind of talked about this a little bit, is playing two quarterbacks. I've just never been a fan of a two quarterback system. I mean, if it's a change of pace, like you've got like Blake Bell a few years ago, and even Caleb Williams had been playing this role in kind of the red zone and fourth and short situations, third and short situations. I'm all for that. I think that's fine, but playing Caleb Williams for 2 or 3 series and then playing Rattler for 2 or 3 series, that's just not good. So whoever they go with, I think they'll go and and use that guy until maybe that guy kind of struggles a little bit. But we'll see. I mean, I think we'll all find out at 6:30 p.m. on Saturday night. Um, I would be a little bit surprised if, I mean, at least right now, if it's not Caleb. Um, but we'll see. Who knows? If Lincoln really still at the end of the day thinks Spencer's experience and what he can give them in the passing game gives them the best chance to be successful, that's what they'll do. But giving all of the intricacies, all of the intangible type of things that are going on with this thing, I would be a little bit surprised if that were to be the case.
In the Jalen Hurts Tua Tagovailoa saga is a good comparison to draw. Jalen Hurts was a guy who, by all accounts, whether that comes from his teammates or Nick Saban or others, did everything right in regards to maintaining his place as a good teammate and supporting. And then I would have never guessed that Jalen Hurts would wind up as a starting quarterback in the NFL. He just never struck me as this guy's going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. And especially at that point in his career, he was
Yeah.
just not projected to be one, and I didn't see him as one. Now the game's changed, and the way offensive football is called now has permeated into the NFL to suit a player of his abilities, and he's improved, and he may be able to thank, and I'm sure he does, his time at Oklahoma and learning under Lincoln Riley, which has suited him for the pro game even more.
Mhm.
But again, getting back to the relationship of in the dynamics of the situation, it's an interesting comparison to draw. Oklahoma fans may want to also consider that number one, Caleb Williams is amazing, 5-star. He's come in and done an outstanding job, and of course, um, the what he pulled off with the help of his teammates, of course, was historic on Saturday. But there could be some down moments and some rough patches as he continues to develop and grow. Number two, don't be surprised if Spencer Rattler is needed at some point. I'm not saying that he will be, but it's a tough sport and injuries do happen. I'm not anticipating necessarily him being needed because of poor play,
Yeah.
because once you commit to making that change, the poor play has to be excessively poor to
Mhm.
go back to the original starter. But that, you know, again, it's a game, it's a collision sport, and injuries do happen. So Oklahoma fans maybe need to be prepared to cheer once again for Spencer Rattler at some point. Most likely not, but it's possible.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You have to expect at some point that and like I said, even if it's a 2-point conversion, even if it's a spot play, even if it's an injury for one single play, then go ahead. I
So
think
what did happen on that 2-point conversion? Because I meant to ask you that because I'm watching, like, I'm not locked in. I'm watching like 3 games and I see Spencer Rattler in for the 2-point conversion and I'm thinking, did Caleb Williams get nicked up on that play? Or is Lincoln Riley just making a move to say, we want to keep you involved in what's going on and keep you in it?
so. I think, and it was kind of funny. I thought the same exact thing. Watching it, and like, what's happening? Why, why is he back in the game at this point? Maybe the most important play of the game at that point right there, right?
Yeah.
And I think just kind of gleaning from that and some of the comments that Lincoln made after the game is just Caleb hasn't had a lot of opportunities to, to get reps in some of their 2-point plays, and then obviously Rattler had got more reps. So I think that's probably the determining factor. Um, doing that over and over and just really, not having Caleb to have the opportunity and experience doing that. However, it's so hard to get anything great. I think he's done a great job since he's been here, but it's so hard to get anything truthful out of Lincoln because it's just coach speak after coach speak after coach speak, and you don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people that think maybe he put him in there just to allow him to get some credibility if he does try to transfer, right? Showing in that moment he was down, but he still delivered a really good pass and made one of the biggest plays of the game there. But even in the post game press conference, Lincoln said that he legitimately thought about putting Spencer Rattler in for the very final drive of the game, and I'm just kind of scratching my head, like that can't be that can't be actually right. Like he's just trying to make the kid, feel better and making and not make him go in the tank or you know what I mean. And but because I can't legitimately think that he had any kind of thoughts about seriously putting Spencer Rattler back in the game at that point. And not to say that Spencer Rattler can't play anymore, but at
Sure.
that moment,
Yeah.
all the momentum as well as
Yes.
Williams has played, there's got to be um, no thought about whatsoever about him putting him back in. So yeah, and I think one of the points that you made, and one of the points that I think it's lost, I think on some people following this story is that he's going to make some mistakes. Like it's going to happen. He's a true freshman. He didn't make any turnover mistakes, but even I think in the games that he's played, he's dropped about 4 or 5 snaps. He's for whatever I don't know if he's just kind of taking his eyes off the snap at the last minute, kind of looking at the defense. He's got to figure that out a little bit. I mean, and there's some typical, very true freshman-esque plays that you would see. He had a couple of check downs that he missed out of the running backs out of the backfield that he missed, and he'll get that with time. But yeah, there's going to be some mistakes. But however, having said that, if something like this was to happen, I think this is the best time for it to happen. TCU's a good team. I mean, don't get me wrong. They've struggled a little bit. They're not anywhere near as good defensively as they've been in the past. Um, but you have Texas Tech, you have Kansas, and then you have a bye week before you get to really the big part of your schedule with going to Baylor, going to Oklahoma State, and hosting Iowa State. So um, I think this is the time to get him really, really involved and really um, really kind of strong and in that continuity with the offense. But um, anyway, I mean, this, like I said, you hear some of the coach speak from Riley. You don't really know. I still would be surprised, but heck, I'm surprised. Me and you were here last week, and we neither of us expected Alabama to lose a game or Georgia to lose a game until the SEC championship game, and it happened. So this year is expect the unexpected by every stretch. I mean, look at the Penn State Iowa game. I mean, just a perfect example of how important it is to have a solid backup and have depth. And I can't. You'll probably be able to remember the kid's name. I can't remember the backup quarterback for Penn State, but that game went the opposite direction in such a hurry because he just wasn't ready to. He just wasn't ready. So it's a good problem I think that Oklahoma has here, without a doubt.
Yeah, Taquan
Yeah.
Roberson, the backup quarterback for Penn State, and that's a difficult game to evaluate now in that conference race. The win is the win, and that's all that matters in the standings. But to evaluate, okay, how good are these teams really, and did the best team win because the losing team was on the road, had a 2-touchdown lead, and there was a definite drop off in quarterback play, something Oklahoma does not have to be concerned with, because even if Spencer Rattler has to play meaningful time the rest of this season, even if he's not one of the 2 best quarterbacks in the nation, as was projected by most going into the season, he's got to be a top 15 quarterback in the country. So,
Oh, absolutely. And yeah,
it's
no,
not
you're
bad for a
absolutely right.
backup.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a very good problem. I mean, as long as he stays involved and stays
Sure.
motivated and stays, kind of into it each and every week. Yeah, it's definitely not a problem. And I've heard he's got like over $50 million in NIL endorsements. So let's not sit here and feel completely bad for Spencer Rattler, right? I mean, granted, I know that he wants to play in the NFL. He loves the idea of being a starting quarterback, but let's not completely feel bad for him. But
Did I get that number correct? 50?
yeah, this is what I
Really?
heard, between 40 and his endorsement, his NIL deals right now are worth in the neighborhood of $40 to $50 million.
I hadn't heard that type of figure for anyone.
Yeah, this is what I heard
Wow.
this past week. So, and that when and this is the problem with NIL that and I love it. I think it's a great idea. These kids being able to make money now, $40 to $50 million. I mean, I think that's a little bit much. Um, but I think if you have a kid like that makes that much money, it's got to turn some of the other players the other way, especially if he's one of those kids that's not, you know, for lack of a better word, willing to share a little bit of it, but just kind of overall looking at this, I don't want I don't want people to get the complete wrong impression, because I saw some comments about Georgia. Oklahoma's not ready. Oklahoma's not quite ready for Georgia. They're not as good as Alabama. They've got a lot of improvements to make, specifically on the back end of the defense. To get the offensive line needs to shore it, but I think you are seeing improvement. Oklahoma's got about 3 or 4 guys that are hurt, between the secondary and the defensive line. That will help once they get going. But Georgia's got the best defense I've seen in a long time. Um, which is going to allow them, if they get, and I don't know how long with that labrum issue that JT Daniels has. I don't know how long that's going to hurt him. I mean, they're obviously not quite as good offensively with Stetson Bennett in there, but I mean, they're good enough. But yeah, I mean, their defense is on a whole new level, than what Oklahoma has faced and or will face, at any point. But I think the one thing that's really interesting with Alabama losing, it does potentially, I think a lot of us, including at least me, I think me and you kind of felt the same with this from a playoff perspective. I think we can start talking a little bit more about playoff stuff now that it's, almost the second half of the season. But, from a playoff perspective, now the situation's opened itself up to possibly having the SEC only get one team in. I mean, you still got a long way to go, obviously, but I think, at least, like I said, I thought it was almost a foregone conclusion that Alabama and Georgia both would get into the playoffs, and there's a chance that might not happen.
Yeah, so that Texas A&M Alabama game was one that I had circled in the off season, but the way Texas A&M was playing, sloppy the entire season, but then losing to two decent teams, but teams that they were penciled in to defeat easily. Nobody was considering those to be the pitfalls in Texas A&M schedule. So if they were capable of losing to Arkansas and Mississippi State, then they're facing Alabama, who looked close to invincible and was coming off just a complete demolition of Ole Miss. Led that game 28-0 at half. I got to tell you, I set my DVR to all sorts of games and try to watch as much as possible. I forgot that those two teams were playing Saturday night. I had Michigan, Nebraska, and Virginia Tech and Notre Dame, and I forget who else. And I got hit with like a bottom line score near halftime, and I thought, I had so disregarded that game that I didn't even think of those two teams playing, that I, locked in on the second half, and Texas A&M pulls it off. So yes, Alabama now in a position where there would have to be complete chaos. Otherwise, will have to win out. And yes, that Georgia defense, my goodness. Arkansas turned around and scored 51 points at Ole Miss. Granted, Ole Miss's defense is very questionable, but still scoring 51 points and just racking up all sorts of yardage. And this is only one example of many. That Arkansas offense against Georgia, they couldn't even run their offense most plays. Couldn't even get the play started.
Yep.
That Georgia defensive front just pushes guards and tackles into the backfield and just disrupts the play before you can even get it started half the time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's when they play Kentucky. Kentucky's the 11th ranked team in the country, and they're favored by almost, what, 24, 23, 24 points?
Yes.
So, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could say, and the problem is, in terms of you kinda look at who could possibly beat Georgia in the regular season. I mean, I think conventionally you say that maybe Florida has an opportunity, but I don't think they're not even good enough offensively, I think, as it stands, not even taking into account the kind of defense that they have to play against Georgia. So I would be shocked. Their defense is gonna, even if they have their offense kind of doesn't play well, their defense will be able to be good enough to um, uh, to to keep them in these games. And I think, we compare conferences here, a lot, and I think the SEC is very interesting. I don't think they're as, I think they're more top heavy than they've been in the past. I think the middle of the SEC is not as good as it's been. LSU is a complete dumpster fire right now. Um, and Auburn is not quite as good as they have been. Kentucky's the third best team in the conference right now. You would have to say. So yeah, I think it's I would say it's evened out a little bit, but the ACC's much worse than it was a year. I mean, at least from Clemson's perspective. I mean, heck, walking into the season, we do a kind of a preseason um, top 50 games, and this North Carolina Miami game was one of the biggest games in the ACC, and now it's like it's irrelevant for both teams. So I don't know. It's such it's a interesting and good year. I think that for us that just rooted and wanted to see a little bit of chaos, is interesting. It's been one of those years, and what we said is there's been so many upsets, but we haven't seen number 1 or number 2 go down. Well, we saw it. So it's, getting close to 2007 level, I think, maybe even more so.
Yeah, the thing I'll say about the North Carolina Miami game, it's not necessarily irrelevant, but it went from going.
Sure.
It was the preseason game of the year in that division. Like everybody else was disregarded. That game was going to decide the division. Well, we should have learned from all these other years in the ACC Coastal that what it is now is it's just one in a sea of games where everybody can beat everybody, and most likely the division champ's going to be like 6-2 best, maybe 5-3, and maybe there's some kind of crazy log jam because they're all defeating each other.
Yeah.
So it's
Mhm.
just one in a zillion games now that matters as much as the rest of them. You can latch onto any matchup in that division practically, and it's just another piece of the puzzle.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and the Big Ten race is going to be fascinating because either Ohio State's kicked it into gear and they'll smash everyone, but that doesn't appear as what's going to happen. It appears as though Penn State, Michigan State could be up to the challenge, and Iowa's running away with its division as it stands right now. So they're going to have some. I don't think any of those teams play each other until October 30th, but starting with that date through the month of November, every week you're going to have some combination of Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State playing each other, and those should be really good football games. So
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, just looking at the schedule, no, you're spot on. Penn State at Ohio State on, October 30th, Michigan at Michigan State. By the way, we all thought that was gonna be a top 10 game, didn't we, to start the
Michigan State,
yeah.
sure. I think
Then
I picked
I mean,
Michigan
Iowa
State to win like 4 games.
mhm.
I was more off on Michigan State than any team in the country.
Oh, I was too. I think in some of our preseason, conference predictions, I think I had them as maybe the second worst team in the conference overall, but Yeah, no, they've done a great job. Wisconsin's not anywhere near as good as they've been in the past. But Iowa obviously goes to Wisconsin. So I mean, I think we're set up, Mark, if some of these things happen the way that we think that they will, with the SEC and the Big Ten specifically, to just have gigantic Big Ten championship games, SEC championship games. I mean, it's hard for me to envision. I mean, you kind of made the point just looking at their schedule. Hard for me to envision Iowa losing a game in the regular season. Um, Ohio State has. You say, I mean, I know, I say that they go to Wisconsin. Think they go to Nebraska late in the year, as well. But other than that,
I don't know, Jason, just the way they play football. Like, I think that
well, yeah,
Iowa, if you go through the individual matchups, I think they're clearly the best team in the division. I think
yeah.
they've proven that already. But I don't know, those Big Ten teams in that West Division, Purdue, Minnesota, certainly Wisconsin, I could see any of those teams jumping up on a given Saturday and knocking off Iowa,
That's true.
Nebraska.
And while we're on the Big Ten, like, and we are us Oklahoma people. I mean, we have an affinity for Nebraska. That team, you have to feel bad for them. Like, at this point, that I've not seen a team that finds more ways to lose a game
Yes,
than they do. I mean, they could concede. What are they now? Are they 3-4?
3-4,
You could
one
make an
and three in the
argument.
Big Ten.
You could make an argument that they should be 7-0.
Yeah. Well, one of the more curious results in the Big Ten, probably the most curious result, is the week 0 game where Illinois beat Nebraska. You would think if they played again, you could put the house money on Nebraska. Now, in terms of all these other games, if people aren't aware here, we've got a number of editions of these team-specific live streams, and we've got a Nebraska live stream. And it's difficult sometimes to find positives. The positive has been in the performance. Playing now 3 top 10 teams to within 1 score.
Mm-hmm.
But I was searching through Scott Frost's resume at Nebraska the other day, thinking, we talk so much. Okay, they're so close. They've gotten so much better. Wow, they played really well this week, but didn't quite get it done. And that was another example against Michigan. And I thought, I'm going to try to find Scott Frost's best win at Nebraska. When are they going to win one of these games? Their best win since he's been there is against a 7-6 Minnesota team his first year. And I'll even qualify that Minnesota started 2-6 and they won their last 5 in a row, plus a bowl game against Georgia Tech. And they were a much different team by the end of the year, and Nebraska caught them. Mm-hmm. So I don't even know what their best win. That technically is their best win. They just can't beat anybody decent. So until I actually see it happen, I'm giving them credit for they're playing well. They're playing tough football against good teams, but just can't get it done.
No, and like I said, you kind of feel bad for them, because I mean, they played really well in the second half, offensively, especially against Michigan. And I actually picked Nebraska. I thought they would actually win the game. Just how well they've been playing recently. I thought at some point you got to think that they'll be able to put it all together and find a way to win some of these close games that they're in. Who knows? Maybe it's against Ohio State later in the year. But I think it's very interesting to see how some of these teams are playing. Ohio State seems to have kind of caught their stride a little bit. I know the competition is horrible right now, but it'll get better. But very interested to see how they play. CJ Stroud's playing at a really, really high level right now, and their defense is playing much better. I think that's the big thing. So this second half is going to be interesting, and who the heck knows what's going to happen in the Big 12? You've got Oklahoma State that's sitting strong right now, but huge game for them going to Texas on Saturday. But then you've got Baylor with 1 loss, Texas with 1 loss, Iowa State with 1 loss, TCU with 1 loss. I don't know. I mean, I think Oklahoma obviously has a kind of a leg up with that win against Texas, but Oklahoma State has a has a decently tough schedule. Coming down the next two. They go to Texas, to Iowa State. They host Kansas, and then they play at West Virginia. I know West Virginia is kind of starting to struggle, but still, it's a road game in the Big 12. So I think this is going to be very interesting to see how the Big 12 finishes up here.
We appreciate everybody being here. We've got 159 on the line here at Sooners Live. Appreciate everybody. Leave your comments and questions. We'll get to this super chat. Thank you so much for the contribution there, Cam Okla.
Yep.
So this is certainly a subject we will hit on. Sorry I'm late, Jason. Boomer Sooner. So, yes, Gabe Dindy is finally a lock 2020 or 2022. And up is going to be a great dynasty for us, Boomer Sooner. So, yes, the commitment coming in this week from Gabe Dindy.
So I think this is something that over the last, I don't know, Mark, 2 or 3, 4 weeks is something that started to kind of trend in Oklahoma's direction. It was really between Oklahoma and Texas A&M. We had talked, I think, in the summer when his dad took a pastoral position in College Station didn't necessarily bode well for Oklahoma's chances. And so I think like I said, I think progressively he liked what he saw from Oklahoma, and then he's probably the biggest recruit, a 5-star, the biggest defensive line recruit that Oklahoma has had since Gerald McCoy, Tommy Harris, kind of in that vein from a defensive lineman. Like I said, number 10 overall in the country. Number, and I don't have the numbers in front of me. Number 1, number 2 defensive lineman, somewhere in that neighborhood, as well. So I think that puts Oklahoma into number 8 overall in the 247 composite. They've got another local kid, Gentry Williams, who's scheduled to make his commitment announcement later on this month. It's looking, that was another situation where it was kind of between Oklahoma and USC. USC was looking, a little bit better. I think earlier on in the summer, Oklahoma made it just a huge charge here. So I think as of right now, I would certainly, I think, just from a trending perspective, I think he's probably trending Oklahoma as well. So that would be a big get for the Sooners as well. So I think we've talked a lot here on the 2023 recruiting, where it's really just kind of been where it's been just the best start to a 2023 class, to a class that's a little bit in the future that Oklahoma's had in quite some time. But I think this is 2022 recruiting is starting to heat up a little bit, and yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to see as recruiting goes on how much of the SEC kind of plays into it for some of these kids as well. So, no, that's a good get, and then Oklahoma's hopeful to secure another commitment later on this month.
Is it just my perception, or has Oklahoma made better inroads in the state of Florida than they have in the past?
Oh, absolutely, and it started with Bob Stoops. They recruited better nationally. Florida is one of the areas where they really recruited extremely well. So yeah, Oklahoma has made a lot of inroads in the South, honestly, in the Florida, Georgia areas. So yeah, I think they've done a great job there as well. Really, just being able to recruit nationally. I think the strategy has been a little bit different over the last 5 to 10 years, but I think they've able to, and I think part of that has been Josh Pate. During the summer, Josh Pate had a really, really good piece kind of talking about the state of Florida recruiting, how Florida State has not done really well recruiting in state, even Florida to a certain perspective, Miami as well. So it's opened up the opportunity for other teams like Oklahoma to be able to come in here. And I think some of these kids, especially at the defensive line, know that they have an opportunity to play immediately. Oklahoma's going to lose Isaiah Thomas after this year. They're going to lose Perrion Winfrey. They're going to lose Nick Benito All three of those guys are going to go to the NFL after the end of this year. So they've got some opportunity to immediate playing time on the defensive line. So.
All right. Got some Michigan fans in here. Bobby Fry.
I see that. I see.
We shall see.
Yeah, the way Ohio State's playing right now, I just don't know if Michigan has enough offense to keep up. That's just my thought. I know that McCaffrey's no, what's his name? McCaffrey, right? What's the
Cade McNamara.
McNamara, that's right.
They're easy to. McCarthy's the backup, so
Yeah.
you got McNamara and McCarthy, and Dylan McCaffrey was there and transferred.
So, I think he's very efficient.
Yep.
The running game is very strong there, but I wonder if they have enough offense. But they do get Ohio State at home, so you never know.
So, yeah, we shall see if Ohio State is the Ohio State team that we've seen over the last 7 or 8 years or more. But they're showing signs that they are, just like on Saturday in the second half, Oklahoma showed signs. So we're anticipating a struggle and a tremendous race in both of these conferences, but there is the potential that Ohio State has figured it out and will just now steamroll as they have the last 6 or 7 years, and Oklahoma could do the same in the Big 12 and completely erase all of our curiosity and excitement about things being not predictable. But at this point, yeah, it's exciting in both conferences to see other teams have a chance and for the Giants to have some vulnerabilities. Do you have any thoughts in particular about this TCU game? They've got this Kendra Miller, who had a big game against Texas Tech on the ground. And, of course, Zach Evans coming in as a 5-star has really lit it up on the ground for TCU. They just annihilated Texas Tech with 35 points in the first half, 52-31 final.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think, I think the good thing for Oklahoma is the strength of their defense is in the running game, and so I think that in terms of the run defense, I think that gives them, a little bit of an advantage from that perspective. But yeah, no, I think, and Gary Patterson's kind of funny, a little bit of gamesmanship that he's doing with Oklahoma. Riley came out and said that they're not. They're not going to name a starter. And then it was not even an hour after that Gary Patterson said that Max Dugan and Zach Evans are both questionable for the game against Oklahoma. So I think it's kind of funny. But yeah, no, they've been really, really good on the ground, like you said, almost 400 yards on the ground against Texas Tech. But their defense just hasn't been the same. So I think that's what's very interesting about this matchup is, they gave up a ton of yards and points to SMU, gave up a ton of yards and points to Texas Tech, almost 31 points, 560 yards total offense. So, I think Oklahoma has I think the matchup is good here. You always kind of worry about the post-Texas, it used to be called the Texas hangover when you get Oklahoma had those games after Texas where they had struggled. That was really more so in the Switzer era, more so where that phrase was coined, where they kind of struggled after that game. But it'll be interesting to see how they come back. I mean, I think people are still here on Wednesday, still talking about the Texas game. So, you wonder what the mentality is internally in terms of how much they're able to focus right now on TCU versus that. So, I think having a team as good as TCU will be helpful for Oklahoma. I think if they played, a Texas Tech or someone other than that didn't get their attention, I think that would be a little bit more of a problem. But I think Oklahoma's only a 10.5, 11-point favorite at this point. So yeah, it should be an interesting game. Oklahoma's. I mean, I know the fans are ready for maybe at least one blowout, one comfortable win. I don't know if we'll get it this week or not, though.
Sooners at 6-0, 3-0 in the conference. TCU comes in at 3-2, 1-1 in the conference. Again, defeated Texas Tech this past weekend, 52-31. You would think with a score like that they threw for a ton of yards, but only about 100 yards passing. They really went to work, as Jason outlined, on the ground with Kendra Miller and Zach Evans. TCU also dropping a game earlier this season out of conference for a second consecutive year to SMU.
Yep.
All right, Jason. We always appreciate you making this happen. So this is our Oklahoma show that we provide for you. Sooners live each and every Wednesday, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. So we appreciate a nice crowd here today. Would like everyone to come on back next week and bring your friends and your family that love Oklahoma football, Texas, the Big 12. Any college football fans are, of course, welcome here at the Voice of College Football. And join Jason after the game against TCU for his post-game show right here on our Sooners channel at the Voice of College Football. Jason does an outstanding job and responds to your comments and questions. Jason, anything else?
No, I don't think so. Just excited for the the second half of the year and what every week has just been an incredible college football year overall. So expect nothing less this week.
We'll see everybody back here next Wednesday. Join Jason after the game against TCU.